Thank you all very much. The topic I want to talk about today is about learning law young. And I want to focus today on what at its core is about Jewish education. But I guess it's not exclusively about Jewish education because it involves a comparison and a contrast. And that comparison and contrast is important to make. Elementary school is to some extent a microcosm of life. We teach our students some math, some science, some literature, some history, all sorts of different things. But more or less in elementary schools and high schools throughout the country, we teach them no law. Law is a discipline that's not taught as a methodology in elementary school or high school or college. Our secular students come to my law school with no exposure to law at all. Law is a very unique graduate program. Students come to law school knowing no law. It's different than chemistry, it's different than physics, it's different than sociology. Students come to law school knowing no law. We don't teach law as an elementary school or high school discipline throughout the United States. That's a fascinating piece of information that you'll need to keep track of. But that's not true for the Jewish tradition. Our elementary schools have a curricular part that's novel and unique and absolutely unfound anywhere else. We expose our students to the methodology of law. It's true, we do it through Jewish law. But it's important to understand that the methodology of Jewish law bears great similarities to the methodology of any legal system, and we stop and we expose our students, really no matter what kind of Jewish school you go to rigorous law. And I want to explore with you tonight a consequence of that I find is frequently overlooked in how we talk about Jewish education. Of course, I understand that teaching Jewish law methodology helps us understand the rabbinic tradition. You can't understand a great deal of Judaism without understanding Jewish law. But it goes much more than that, and it goes far beyond that. The exposure of our students to Jewish law and to law as a teaching exercise changes how they think about all sorts of hard problems in 5 ways that I'll explain to you as we go on. It's important to understand, though, that we are contributing something unique and interesting, something peculiar that we do that almost nobody else does. Justice Holmes likes to observe in a wonderful, famous quote. He says, "All the great questions of theology and philosophy ultimately come to law for their resolution." It's a statement that the great rabbis certainly, the great Talmudic rabbis certainly agreed with, but it's also a fundamental statement for understanding what goes on in the United States. Law is the discipline. You stop and look at our presidents. You see that President Obama is a product of Harvard Law School. It's a very common training ground for all sorts of leaders, not because learning law is particularly important in many disciplines. It's because learning to think about law in a certain way changes and affects the way you think about all sorts of problems, not just technical problems dealing with the law, but problems of every type and every variety. Jewish education is the only educational system I'm aware of that systemically teaches our students to think about law in a law-thinking kind of way. And we produce a different product when you finish high school in terms of tools in their toolbox. We analyze hard problems from a law perspective in ways that almost nobody else does. Not Jewish law problems, not law problems, but life problems. And it's important to understand that we add a very significant tool to the toolbox of to the toolbox our students have as they leave Jewish education. You might say to yourself, but we add other tools, but I'm not really sure, because it's true we teach our students Hebrew, and almost nobody else teaches Hebrew, but I'm not sure if the thinking skills you get from learning Hebrew is any different than the thinking skills you get from learning Mandarin. And I can tell you from my experiences traveling, Mandarin is a much more common language. That's the truth. And I'm not sure that when we teach our students Chumash as a form of literature, they get better literary analysis skills than other students get when we teach them Chaucer as literature. It's true, they know more Bible. But I think the thinking skills you get from thinking about Torah as a storybook are probably no more useful in life than the skills you get from thinking about Chaucer as a storybook. It's true, I think honestly, if we taught our students Jewish law as we do, they'd get no better thinking skills than if we taught our elementary school and high school students law thinking in American law. But, and this is very important, we don't. Our secular educational system, which teaches our students math and science and English and history, and teaches them all sorts of social skills from sports to team learning, to all sorts of other very important skills, graduate students from high school and even from college with no real thinking skills to think about what we in law school call law think. But all of us who went from Jewish educational systems to law school, we find ourselves sitting in our first year of law school saying, I know how to do that already. This is not a foreign skill set to me. It's true, I don't know any American contract law as a 1L, but I know how to think about law as legal thinking, and it affects almost every aspect of your life. I confess to you, my children comment to me, my wife and I are both trained lawyers, and they remark to me that when we discuss family problems, they say, we discuss them like two lawyers. Like two lawyers. I don't know if it's a compliment or not. The kids have come out great. Whatever it is, it is. But law thinking is not just about law problems. It's about family problems. It's about children problems. It's certainly about real estate problems. It's certainly about politics. President Obama calls upon his law skills every day in his job, and parents who are lawyers call upon their law skills all the time. We provide that educational model to our children, and we frequently miss speaking about it to the community. When you talk to people about what you get from Jewish education, we like to tell them the obvious things. You come out of a Jewish educational system being more Jewish, more familiar with your Jewish values, speaking a little bit of Hebrew, reading a little bit more Hebrew. But when it comes to tools and skill sets, we tell them, you don't come out with tools and skill sets any better. We don't teach the math any different. We don't teach the science any different. But I'm telling you that you come out of an educational system that teaches Jewish law with a skill set that people otherwise don't have. You spend your time opening a page of the Talmud. It doesn't deal with arcane Jewish law. It deals with two people who find a lost object, who both simultaneously grasp this lost object, and now we need to figure out who owns it. It's not a Jewish law question at all. It's a thinking problem, and we teach our students the skills how to resolve those thinking problems. At the end of the day, I think when you teach your children law thinking, you teach them 5 methodological skills, which I see all the time coming out of a good Jewish law education. And each of these 5 is very important. I think that you learn to think about problems in a law way. Law has a skill set. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's different than the way both of my parents, physical chemists by training, used to discuss the problems with their children. I was a problem child, and the 2 physical chemists in my family, they would discuss it like they discuss any other physical chemistry problem. You teach the students how to think like lawyers. Second, it teaches you a type of analytic reasoning that you encounter all the time in many, many, many different problems. And this form of analytic reasoning is very helpful and very positive. Third of all, and I know you'll find this bizarre, it teaches law obedience. Law, as a methodology, teaches students the importance of obeying laws that you don't always agree with. Now, some of you might think that's not such a good skill. Maybe it's not so important that our children be law obedient, but I think most of us, given a choice between law obedient or law disobedient children, we think obedience to law is probably a good thing. Law training teaches you to appreciate the minutiae and the details of law and the complex intricacies associated with law. Fourth, and perhaps most interesting, when you learn a lot of law training, you learn the value of a dialectic tension. Law is frequently made up of 2 or 3 or even 4 competing policies, and law, unlike math or philosophy, which tends to say this approach is right and all these other approaches are wrong, law tends to say, you know, these are all pretty good values. Let's craft a policy that grabs a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this other thing. It teaches you the art of methodological compromise, something that I find my law students and lots of people don't know. They think you have to look at a problem and pick the one true result. Law school teaches you, and law thinking teaches you, that frequently policy compromise is the best approach. The dialectic tension, or the trialectic tension, is part and parcel of the educational model that law thinking teaches you. Anybody who's learned a page of Talmud understands that the Talmud has competing goals. Frequently, the final product is a compromise between 3 or 4 different views, and these 3 or 4 different views are kind of all correct, and we try to craft a compromise that accommodates a little bit of all of them. That's a very important, perhaps the most important methodology. Finally, you should know there's quite a bit of research from a researcher in Israel whose last name is Kanarik, showing that you do better on your LSATs, and you do better on your first year of law school, and on the analytic part of your SATs, if you're taught law at a young age. We produce better outcomes, not better Jewish law people, not people more capable necessarily of mastering a page of Talmud, but we produce people with a different additional tool in their toolbox, and this different additional tool in their toolbox helps them throughout their life. So what's the take-home? The take-home, of course, is 2 levels. It's easy for me to explain to you what you're supposed to be doing is studying more Jewish law, because if you study more Jewish law, you'll come out knowing more Jewish law. That seems somewhat obvious, but I don't think that's important. I think to many of us, not myself, I confess, I'm interested in Jewish law as a self-standing discipline, but to many parents, that their children know another page of Talmud is worth almost nothing to them. Mastering the intricacies of Jewish law doesn't interest many people. I think it's worth explaining, however, that the Jewish educational system does something very unique. It puts a tool in our children's toolbox. What's that tool? It teaches them law think. Law thinking. It teaches them how to look at a complex policy, analyze it in a number of different levels, figure out how to apply it to the next case, and the next case after that, and say to yourself, well, if I change one of the variables, will it produce a different outcome? If I change 2 of the variables, will it produce a different outcome? What's the central issue at play here, and why is this very important? That skill set changes the way you look at real estate deals. It changes the way you look at American law. It changes the way you negotiate marital difficulties with your wife or husband. It changes the way you think about all sorts of fascinating problems. The Jewish educational system is providing our students with a unique tool, a tool that you can get if you go to law school. Or if you don't want to go to law school, but you want to learn that tool, you could send your kids to a Jewish day school and high school where they'll give you the functional equivalent of a first-year law school curriculum. It's a fascinating approach. It's a fascinating idea for what we really have set out to do in the Jewish educational system, and to my surprise, it's almost never spoken about. Thank you very much.